Newsnight on BBC Two with Gavin Esler.
We are facing the greatest economic challenge of our lifetime.
Reality bites. Obama faces up to the crisis. Tonight, Barack Obama's first news conference as president-elect. After the election party, a lot of sobering up. He promises to push ahead with a rescue plan for the middle class as we hear America's worst unemployment figures in 14 years.
It is not going to be quick, and it's not going to be easy for us to dig ourselves out of the hole that we are in.
The banks give way after a caning from the Chancellor. They pass on interest rate reductions to their customers. Newsnight exclusive. Did Europe's early warning system fail on the Georgia-Russia war? An insider speaks out.
This is a failure. Yeah, it was a failure for the OSCE. Absolutely. The OSCE has been working in South Ossetia for many, many years. We were the one institution that had a feel for what was going on there.
And is this the brown bounce? Labour wins the Glenrothes by-election.
And on Newsnight Review at 11, I'm joined by Ian Rankin, Julie Myerson and Sarfraz Manzoor.
So young and so untender.
Pete Postlethwaite is Lear in Liverpool.
Thy truth then be thy dower.
Easy Virtue, a modern twist on Noel Coward.
When does the carnage begin?
Alistair Campbell, new fiction from the king of spin.
It was like an in-joke. Feels bad, like nothing there, nothing.
There is no God!
And Civil War TV drama in The Devil's Whore.
Good evening. Today, the grim economic news just kept on coming for the president-elect and his new team. The United States faces more than 1 million lost jobs this year, 10 million unemployed in total, a faltering car industry, what Barack Obama calls the backbone of American manufacturing, in deep trouble. Tonight, he talked in general terms about what he will do on the economy. In a moment, we'll discuss just how realistic Obamonomics really is. First, David Grossman reports from Chicago.
For his first on-camera event since election night, President-elect Obama met with his economic advisers. To his right, Paul Volcker, former Fed chair, tipped by many as a possible Treasury secretary. There was plenty for them to talk about. Unemployment up, confidence down, and the markets all over the place. And that one-time symbol of American industrial muscle, the car industry, now begging for a taxpayer bailout. In a short while, President-elect Obama will arrive at this Chicago hotel to face the press, and there are lots of questions for him to answer. During the course of the campaign, a consistent criticism from the Republican side was this: change, they said, all sounds very good, but it's not really a destination. Hope, they said, is all very well, but it's not a strategy. Today, people are going to be looking for more details of just what an Obama presidency will mean. Before the next president walked onto the stage, his economic advisers, the vice president-elect and his newly appointed chief of staff lined the stage, all designed to reassure that this, one of the most inexperienced presidents in American history, will have plenty of help.
I do not underestimate the enormity of the task that lies ahead. We have taken some major action to date, and we will need further action during this transition and subsequent months. Some of the choices that we make are going to be difficult. And I have said before, and I will repeat again, it is not going to be quick, and it is not going to be easy for us to dig ourselves out of the hole that we are in.
Barack Obama may have just got himself a new job, but plenty of his fellow Americans are losing theirs. 240,000 jobs disappeared in October. More people are going to be looking for help. These are military veterans. They've just received a handout of winter clothes. The predictions are that things are going to get much chillier. Perhaps another 500,000 unemployed before the new president is sworn in. Nevertheless, at this Chicago employment office, we found some optimism. He is going to make a difference to your life.
Oh, yes, he is, because what he did in Chicago. I live here. He did a lot of things, and the people that surround him, the Republicans and the Democrats that surround him, are very smart people, and they know what to do.
So what can the new president do about unemployment? Well, he's promising to spend $150 billion on job creation and a fiscal stimulus package of tax cuts.
My tax plan represented a net tax cut. It provided for substantial middle-class tax cuts. 95% of working Americans would receive them. It also provided for cuts in capital gains for small businesses, additional tax credits. All of it is designed for job growth. My priority is going to be, how do we grow the economy? How do we create more jobs?
People are losing their jobs because companies are struggling. The American car industry is in desperate shape. Ford has announced third quarter operating losses of $3 billion and has said that jobs will have to go. Meanwhile, General Motors today announced third quarter losses of $2.5 billion and has warned it could well run out of cash next year. President-elect Obama is promising government money to the car industry in return for them making more fuel-efficient cars.
The auto industry is the backbone of American manufacturing and a critical part of our attempt to reduce our dependence on foreign oil. I would like to see the administration do everything it can to accelerate the retooling assistance that Congress has already enacted. In addition, I've made it a high priority for my transition team to work on additional policy options to help the auto industry adjust, weather the financial crisis, and succeed in producing fuel-efficient cars here in the United States.
It's not just America that's looking for economic leadership. Next Friday, world leaders will gather in Washington for a summit to discuss the world's financial problems. It is to the new Obama presidency that they are looking for answers. So what, Senator Obama was asked, will happen if there's a disagreement with the current president?
I'm not going to anticipate problems. I'm going to go in there with a spirit of bipartisanship and a sense that both the president and various leaders in Congress all recognize the severity of the situation right now and want to get stuff done.
Everyone wants to know, what kind of dog are you going to buy?
One of the more talked about announcements that President-elect Obama has made is that his children, Malia and Sasha, can have a dog when they live at the White House. But even here, Senator Obama is finding that campaign promises are hard to deliver on.
We have two criteria that have to be reconciled. One is that Malia is allergic, so it has to be hypoallergenic. There are a number of breeds that are hypoallergenic. On the other hand, our preference would be to get a shelter dog, but obviously a lot of shelter dogs are mutts like me.
There is a bigger problem that will dog America's next leader. He was voted in by people who want him to make their lives better. But the economic prospects are worse than they've been for 15 years. There is then a fundamental mismatch between what the experts expect from the economy and what the American public expect from their next president.
Puppies aside, this is obviously huge. Joining me now is a former advisor to Bill Clinton, founder of the New Democratic Network, Simon Rosenberg, and Pippa Malmgren, who worked for George W. Bush on economics. Simon, first, of course you only have one president at a time, but it is unrealistic to think that President-elect Obama can wait till January the 20th without taking some pretty big decisions.
Well, I think there's a difference between him deciding what he's going to do and him announcing that to the world. President Bush will be the...
Oh, well, there we are. That's the wonders of television for you. Pippa, we've just lost our signal to Washington.
I heard.
Yeah, I think everybody heard. Let me put the same thing to you. I mean, that is the problem, isn't it? He's got to be seen to be getting on with it because people will look to him inevitably.
Absolutely, but let's keep in mind, it looks highly likely that Tim Geithner is going to land up as the Secretary of the Treasury. He's been the key person at the Federal Reserve, orchestrating all the very specific programs to deal with the financial crisis. So in a sense, we're probably going to get some continuity of policy, not a disruption. I think Secretary Paulson, the President himself, have made it crystal clear that they intend to facilitate a very smooth transition, given the complexity of the times we're in. So I don't think that it's going to be a really tricky period in terms of unexpected political turmoil. Although the appointment of Emmanuel Rahm as the chief of staff for Obama has filled Washington with a little bit of nervousness because of his reputation for not being bipartisan. But in this case, I don't think we're going to see too much partisan haggling.
Okay, well let's bring in Simon if he's still there. What were you going to say before you were so rudely interrupted, Simon?
I was just going to say that, we do have one president, and I think that until January 20th, President-elect Obama will be following the lead of Congress and the current administration, but he will be conferring with the current administration, with the leaders in Congress, with his own team, building his government, and he's going to come out of the box very strong, I think, on January 20th with a real plan to tackle the economic slowdown that we have and to get people working again.
Pippa, I want to spend most of this conversation talking about Obama, but do you worry that President Bush, lame duck president, demoralized, that he still has got a couple of months to serve out, as it were, and he will not offer much leadership because there's not much he feels he can do?
Well, I do think that he'll work closely with President-elect Obama. I think that the two of them will probably be spending rather more time together than people would imagine. I think the bigger problem is this high expectation that somehow whoever is in the West Wing can fix this thing. The real economy is a very complex phenomena, and it is not up to the West Wing of the White House to have the solution. We know that from history. The White House can provide, some leadership, some guidance. Frankly, Congress holds the keys in terms of cash. They've made it clear they're going to spend. My question would be, what will that expenditure look like? Because just throwing cash at the economy doesn't necessarily make it come back to life. So we have to ask real questions about that.
And Simon, just in terms of priorities, I mean, a middle-class tax cut, a fiscal stimulus package, healthcare reform, cut greenhouse gases, boost the car industry. I mean, you can see, all things to all people, but you can't do all of that, can you?
No, and I think that it's a great question, and I think that President-elect Obama is going to be doing the best he can. I think that he will be conferring with the leaders of Congress, and I think he will be. I agree with your guest that he's going to be spending a lot of time with the current administration and trying to really come up with a clear plan, a set of priorities. One of the things we learned about Barack Obama during the campaign is that he was very disciplined. He was able to set clear priorities, develop a plan, stick to it, and fight hard for it. And I think that those leadership attributes are going to be very much in demand during the next few months when he'll have to pare down all the things he could do to the things that are most important. And I think and we'll be hearing much more about that, I think, on January 20th in the inaugural.
Pippa, as that realism sets in, he's also, both Reagan and Clinton faced economic problems right at the start of their presidencies. Both were very, very good communicators. I mean, that's presumably Obama's great strength. He may not be able to fix it all, but he can explain it in ways that ordinary folk can understand. Pippa, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Sorry. Well, I think he is a superb communicator. There's no question about that. I think the more difficult challenge is that some of the messages he wants to convey are not currently consistent with what the market is doing. For example, he really wants to invest in alternative energy, and the country wants that, the world wants that. Very difficult when the oil price is falling to the point that it renders all alternative investment energy investment no longer profitable. You just can't make money investing in ethanol once the oil price falls, below $50, which is what we're headed for. And if the economy keeps weakening, it's going to keep going lower. So that's the sort of thing that's a super challenge. You can say you want to shift away from oil dependency, but, if the oil price keeps falling, how do you practically make that happen?
Pippa Malmgren, Simon Rosenberg, thank you both very much. Now, we'll see tomorrow morning's front pages in a moment, but the tabloids might well lead with banks do the right thing shock after, with some honourable exceptions, not cutting interest rates yesterday in line with the Bank of England's cut. The bank bosses were called into the headmaster's study to see the Chancellor Alistair Darling today. Alex Ritson has the details. They were given a bit of a spanking, were they?
Would have been certainly interesting to watch. The way the government sees it, the banks were offered a great opportunity to help the UK spend its way out of the recession, and only two banks actually seized that opportunity. They were the honourable exceptions. They were Lloyds, TSB and the Abbey. They passed on that rate cut straight away. Their customers have extra money to spend now at the end of the month. All the other banks, though, as of this morning, were still sitting on their hands. They hadn't passed on that rate cut to their customers, and even in some cases threatened to remove the remaining products that they had on the market for new mortgage customers that actually tracked the main interest rate. That really was not the way the government wanted this to happen, the way the Chancellor wanted it to happen. He called those bank bosses into his office. He may not have actually really spanked them, but certainly he will have shown them this morning's newspapers, which are all very, very hostile, and reminded them that the government has helped the banks a lot in recent weeks and that they may need that help again in the future. And so pretty soon these remaining banks did pass on that interest rate cut.
Bearing in mind that the banks are businesses rather than charities, though. I wonder how they reacted to that.
Well, the people I've been speaking to in the banking industry haven't liked the way the government has handled this at all. The way they see it, a lot of them would have passed on this rate cut anyway, but they had to do the sums first. They had to work out how much it would cost, and they feel they've been sort of backed into the corner. The way it now looks is that the government forced them into doing this, and they actually don't like that. They don't like the perception that the government's telling them what to do. One even reminded me of what happened in the 1970s and said that's what happens when government actually tells us how to run our businesses.
But I suppose you could say people up and down the land are wondering why the banks have been so reluctant to pass on this huge cut in interest rates.
Well, it's maybe not quite as simple as some of the newspapers would have you believe. It's not just the base rate that the banks need to consider when they are trying to work out whether to pass these interest rate cuts on. Actually, the rate that they're looking at is the rate at which banks lend money to each other, the 3-month LIBOR rate, or the LIBOR rates in general. Now, in times gone by, the LIBOR rate was pretty close to the way it was before. If you had a Bank of England base rate, the LIBOR rate would only be slightly different. As time has moved on, they've gone completely divergent. That means that the banks are actually spending a lot more money to implement those base rate cuts than if it tracked the base rate directly. It also means that the expensive LIBOR rate means that the banks simply still don't trust each other. There's still a big gap between the base rate and the LIBOR rate, and even after the cut yesterday, the 1.5% cut in the base rate, the LIBOR rate is still only moved about a percentage point down. So any difference the banks are actually having to make up from their own resources. And of course, if the banks are forced to do things that they feel just simply isn't good business sense, the banks will be back in trouble.
Alex, thanks very much. And let's have a quick look at the markets today, because the FTSE 100 share index did close up 93 points up in New York. The Dow Jones rose 248 points against the euro. The pound a short while ago was up. Against the dollar, the pound was also up. Now, Newsnight's Tim Hewell secured a big scoop last month, being the first Western journalist given unfettered access to South Ossetia, the flashpoint in this summer's war between Georgia and Russia. Now the evidence he collected of Georgia's apparently indiscriminate attack has been backed up by the chief international monitor in Georgia at the time. In his first TV interview, Ryan Grist cast further doubts on Georgia's version of events. And he says his top bosses in the OSCE, which is the Organisation for Security Cooperation in Europe, failed to alert the world to the gravity of the crisis, though that was their primary task. Here's Tim Hewell's exclusive report.
When Georgian troops rolled into Tskhinvali, capital of the breakaway region of South Ossetia, on the morning of August the 8th this year, they were confident of victory.
This is where my son's blood was. The neighbours have cleared it up now.
Also gathering evidence, before, during and after the war, were the military monitors of the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE. It acts on behalf of 56 member governments as an early warning system for upcoming conflict. After the war, I joined them on a patrol near the Georgian-Ossetian dividing line. Their reports to member governments are confidential. But now the former British Army officer who was in charge of them during the war has told Newsnight that their evidence backed what we found in Tskhinvali. Ryan Grist has worked for 15 years as a peacekeeper and monitor in conflict zones. He was acting head of the OSCE mission in Georgia when the country's armed forces launched their attack on Tskhinvali.
It was pretty much an indiscriminate attack on a civilian town. Now, there are some military targets there which may have been of interest to the Georgian side. Halfway through the night, our two military observers and one political officer that remained, international staff that remained in Tskhinvali during that night, reported that some 40 to 50 shells had fallen, close to the office there, the field office in Tskhinvali, and that field office is nowhere near any kind of military target.
Some of the buildings hit by Georgian rockets in Tskhinvali were arguably military targets. This was South Ossetia's parliament, though it hid below ground the central command bunker of the region's own rebel army. But other buildings destroyed by the Georgians had no military significance, and it now turns out that the monitors had raised the danger of such an offensive several weeks before, when Georgia launched a similar, though smaller, artillery attack on the town, the first in several years.
An escalation a few weeks prior to this actual attack on the 7th where these 4 rounds of mortar rounds were fired into the town. That was a severe escalation. And certainly at the briefing when these 20 or so ambassadors arrived, certainly I personally made the point very clearly to them that this was a severe escalation. Not only did it put all of our staff at risk, it put every civilian in Sin Valley at risk, and not only that, of course, the place has Russian peacekeepers, and it would give the Russian Federation any excuse it needed in terms of trying to support its own troops.
If the OSCE monitors on the ground were so clear that a serious conflict was imminent, an obvious question arises. Why did the OSCE's member states, including Britain, the United States, France, Germany and Russia, fail to act more decisively to avert the war? Was it their fault? Did they misread the signals? Or did the OSCE itself, at a higher level, fail to alert them with sufficient urgency? In other words, did a huge structure, which costs £130 million a year to maintain, fail in its most basic and crucial task? Ryan Grist, who's now resigned from the OSCE, believes it did.
This is a failure. Yeah, it was a failure for the OSCE. Absolutely. The OSCE has been working in South Ossetia for many, many years. We were the one institution that had a feel for what was going on there. At the mission level, there clearly wasn't the eye on the ball, I think, at the higher diplomatic level, I would say, because it was clear that something was brewing.
The war killed off the organisation's own slow and patient efforts to build peace. This Georgian farmer, whose cows were killed by Ossetian or Russian artillery, was part of an OSCE scheme to bring businessmen from both sides together. Georgia now blames the Ossetians and their Russian allies for escalating hostilities, a process it claims was also documented by OSCE monitors.
What we have witnessed, starting from the 28th of July, was continuous attacks on Georgia-controlled villages. Numerous attempts by Georgian government to at least meet the separatist authorities to negotiate the ceasefire and to negotiate the ceasing of hostilities.
The Georgian government's account of the war is now beginning to be disputed in Georgia itself, with opposition protests today in the capital Tbilisi. But there's no doubt that the country paid a very heavy price for the conflict, with thousands of refugees forced to leave Georgian villages in Ossetia that have now been destroyed. The failure to avert the war will have long consequences for international relations, but even longer ones for ordinary people on both sides of the divide.
Tim Huell. Well, earlier I spoke with the head of the OSCE, the Finnish Foreign Minister Alexander Stubb in Helsinki. I asked him to comment on Mr. Grist's allegations.
Well, I mean, I'm the chairman of the OSCE. We have 56 countries in the organization, and there is a lot of propaganda and allegations going on left and right about who started the war, how it progressed and proceeded in that sense. Alan Grist has been speaking in his personal capacity, not as in his capacity as an excellent civil servant for the OSCE.
But Mr. Grist says it was a huge failure on the part of the OSCE that you were told about an escalating and serious conflict and you didn't do anything.
If the accusation is that the OSCE failed to maintain peace, I think the accusation is absolutely right. Because we are an organization of peace. We have no military means to deal with a situation. We only have diplomatic means. The diplomatic means failed, and that's why we had to act immediately when the war had started. And then we only had one aim, and that was a ceasefire. And I think we succeeded quite well in that.
But Mr. Grist says specifically that he told his superiors there was a grave risk of a conflict, that Georgian artillery was moving into the border region, and that was not transmitted to member governments. Is that true?
No, I think that was transmitted to member governments, and the reporting system is such that we have so-called spot reports, and they are sent immediately to all the 56 members, and then they make their own assessment. But I think the machinery was working very well. I myself got worrying information around the 7th of August that something, so to say, is cooking, but that was going on all the time on both sides.
Well, you said quite rightly that both sides have tried to make propaganda out of this, but do you accept that Georgia's use of force was excessive and that they did kill people indiscriminately in their attacks?
No, really, I mean, I'm chairing an organization of 56 members, so in that sense, I don't take sides. What's going on right now is that we have this international committee which is making an assessment what version of the start of the war was the correct one. And of course, as OSCE chairman, I give my full support on that. But listen, I try to back both of these important members of the OSCE, in other words, Georgia and Russia. And for me, the most relevant thing right now is that we have the peace negotiations ongoing. We sit around the table and try to find a permanent solution to these so-called frozen conflicts.
I suppose the really damaging part of Mr. Grist's allegations is that you were so convinced you could make Russia the bogeyman that you did take sides, you weren't impartial, and because of that, as an early warning system, you just failed.
Well, of course, that's quite a serious allegation, but if you look at all the statements that I've made, for instance, during the day of the 7th of August, I very strictly say that I have serious concerns about the situation. Let's keep the facts right. I have eight military observers in southern Ossetia. Had I known that a war would have taken place, I would have never left 3 of those people there. My mission head, Terhi Hakala, is a brilliant woman, and she had the situation as much under control as you can. These 3 military observers had to stay in a cellar in Skin Valley for over 24 hours, and all they actually had was water and vodka. Now, one of them was a Finnish major, and he could survive on those, but they wouldn't have stayed there for a long time. The bottom line is, had we known, we would not have left our 3 military monitors in there.
Mr. Stoop, thank you very much. Now, last night's victory for the Labour Party in the Glenrothes by-election has led to all kinds of alliterative headlines today. The Brown Bounce, the new comeback kid, Labour's Lazarus. Well, it's certainly thrown up questions for the Scottish National Party and also for the Conservatives about whether Gordon Brown's handling of the economy is actually meeting the expectations of voters. Our political editor, Michael Crick, reports.
It was a result hardly anyone, this reporter included, managed to predict even last night. Labour would have been happy with any majority. They got a whopping 6,700 in a contest where local issues played a bigger role than normal.
People here in Fife are concerned about the quality of life, the cost of life, the rate of their mortgage is the cost of food and energy. And Lindsay and the Labour Party had very clear answers to those questions around Gordon Brown's leadership. And it is a real contrast between Gordon Brown's determined and substantial leadership and contrast with Alex Salmond's bluster. And Alex Salmond's gone from being confident to being arrogant.
The SNP had promised, win or lose, a press conference in Glenrothes for around 10 this morning, but that was suddenly switched to Edinburgh. Yeah, right. And instead, in the constituency, we found staff clearing up the debris.
Where's Mr. Salmond? He should be here this morning, shouldn't he?
I was the candidate in 2005. It was a 10,500 Labour majority. Huge ask. Huge ask. I think.
But why go around telling everybody you're going to win then?
Why
if
not?
It's a huge ask, as you say.
I didn't tell anybody we were going to win. I know.
No, but your leader did. Your leader did. Mistake, wasn't it?
I wouldn't have said so.
If he'd won, who can doubt that Alex Salmond would have made his 15th trip to Glenrothes today, beaming triumphant. Yet in defeat, he showed striking humility.
We had a setback yesterday, and while it's certainly true we've had virtually untrammelled political success for 18 months, nothing in politics or life continues in that vein for forever, and therefore the job of confronting a setback is to learn lessons to overcome it and come back stronger.
Right. The Lib Dems, given their dreadful result, seemed amazingly cheerful. Their vote fell by almost 80% in the 4th bad by-election for Nick Clegg in 4 goes. And yet, they should have done well here. They've got 2 of Fife's 4 MPs already.
This is more about the SNP. They were found wanting. They put a case forward that the voters here rejected. They took for granted the people in Glenrothes, and they were shown the door. I think it is a really bad night for the SNP. Their bubble has burst at last.
Visiting Glasgow, David Cameron, whose man also lost his deposit, was equally keen to push